I want to listen to Project 2025. I converted it to an audiobook. Let's listen through. This is section 1. If you didn't see the other parts, don't sweat it. This stands independently of the rest.
American dominance of the global energy market would be a good thing for the world, and more importantly, for we the people. It's not just about jobs, even though unleashing domestic energy production would create millions of them. It's not just about higher wages for workers who didn't go to college, though they would receive the raises they have missed out on for 2 generations. It would build powerful alliances with fast-growing nations in Africa and provide us the leverage to counter Chinese ambitions in South America and the Pacific. Locally, it would drive billions of dollars of private investment to the communities that have been hammered by globalization since the 1990s.
That have been hammered by globalization. Anytime you hear them talk about globalization, quote unquote, it's them being nationalistic. There's a difference between nationalism. Holy Christ, dude, what is happening outside? That is insane. There's a difference between nationalism and patriotism. Nationalism is the belief that your group has the sole right to rule, and that the other groups need to either be removed, deported from the country, removed from power in one way or another. White nationalists, for example, believe that only white people belong in power in the country, and some of them believe that only white people belong in the country. Christian nationalists believe only Christians should be in power in the United States. There are a billion different forms of nationalists. It's usually paired with another word. There are black nationalists even that want to create an independent country for black people where white people are not allowed. It should be clear how that's different from patriotism, right? Now, nationalism without a qualifier, without like an additional adjective, just plain nationalism, usually applies to like U.S. nationalism, just like your belief that the United States is exceptional and deserves to rule everything. Wow. I don't know what is going on outside, but it is insane. I'm not going to miss this. This happens more often than you'd think, and I ignore it usually. Anyway, like the United States deserves to control China and Russia and everywhere else, and should take over as much as humanly possible. Try to take everything. That's what nationalism is. So anyway, when they talk about globalism or globalization or whatever, it's in contrast to nationalism, which is what they are. A lot of times people don't want to speak positively about nationalism because that's what Hitler was. He was a nationalist. The National Socialists, also called the Socialist Nationalists, another word for it. And the Christian denomination, the basically Nazified Christianity, wanted to call themselves the Christian nationalists. It's a little more complicated than that, actually. They wanted to call themselves Christian nationalists, basically evangelische Nationalismus. But they ended up calling themselves German Christians because Hitler personally vetoed the name Christian nationalist. Anyway, that should give a little context. Let's keep listening here.
And it would clarify our intentions to Beijing that the next president can ensure that a large part of America's reindustrialization is in the production of the equipment we will need to dissuade future foreign meddling with U.S. vital interests. Promise number 4, secure our God-given individual right to enjoy the blessings of liberty. The Declaration of Independence famously asserted the belief of America's founders that all men are created equal and endowed with God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's the pursuit of happiness, that is central to America's heroic experiment in self-government.
When they say pursuit of happiness, the founding fathers had something very specific in mind. Like and by the way, that's in the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution, I believe. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness means, you can't be jailed for absolutely no reason. But these people interpret it completely differently. These people interpret it to mean like your right to, you know what, let's just listen and let them explain it.
When the founders spoke of pursuit of happiness, what they meant might be understood today as, in essence, pursuit of blessedness. That is, an individual must be free to live as his creator ordained.
I don't have any clue what that means or what the hell they are talking about. That is nonsense. You think the founding fathers, the founders of secularism on a national level, wanted people to pursue blessedness? That's what they put in there? What are you talking about, bro?
To flourish. Our Constitution grants each of us the liberty to do not what we want, but what we ought. This pursuit of the good life is found primarily in family, marriage, children, Thanksgiving dinners, and the like.
Oh my God, dude, are you hearing this? They're saying that our rights are not... All right, us having the right to do things isn't, we don't have the right to do whatever we want. They're saying we have the right to do whatever we should, i.e., we want to marry a guy for a guy. Like, we want to be able to get gay married. That's not a right because you shouldn't do that. You only have a right to do what you should do, which is get married to a woman. What a whacked out, ass backward interpretation. That is wild. I just finished writing a book titled Was Hitler an Atheist? It talks about religions during the Third Reich and how they work together. Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Protestants. And I even address the lies told by the evangelical world about Bonhoeffer. It's on Audible and Amazon. Okay, let's continue.
Many find happiness through their work. Think of dedicated teachers or healthcare professionals, entrepreneurs or plumbers throwing themselves into their businesses. Anyone who sees a job well done as a personal reward. Religious devotion and spirituality are the greatest sources of happiness around the world. Still, others find themselves happiest in their local voluntary communities of friends, their neighbors, their civic or charitable work.
So they're saying your right to pursue happiness, we're going to tell you what that's going to be. And we've determined that church makes people happy. So you have a right to go to church. Otherwise, the right to happiness doesn't apply in any way. That is wild.
The American Republic was founded on principles prioritizing and maximizing individuals' rights to live their best life or to enjoy what the framers called the blessings of liberty. It's this radical equality.
Okay, I've never heard the term blessings of liberty, but I guess maybe. No, it was all built on the right to do whatever we want as long as we don't interfere with other people's rights.
Liberty for all, not just of rights but of authority, that the rich and powerful have hated about democracy in America since 1776.
They're trying to pretend to be like, they're right-wing populists right now. They're trying to pretend to be anti-rich person. Do you know how filthy rich the people are that wrote this?
They resent Americans' audacity in insisting that we don't need them to tell us how to live. It's this inalienable right of self-direction, of each person's opportunity to direct himself or herself and his or her community to the good, that the ruling class disdains. With the Declaration and Constitution, our nation's founders handed to us the means with which to preserve this right. Abraham Lincoln wrote of the Declaration as an apple of gold in a silver frame, the Constitution. So must the next conservative president look to these documents when the elites mount their next assault on liberty. Left to our own devices, the American people rejected European monarchy and colonialism, just as we rejected slavery, second-class citizenship for women, mercantilism, socialism, Wilsonian globalism, fascism, communism, and today, wokeism. To the left, these
Oh my God. I love how they categorize quote-unquote wokeism in the same group as fascism and communism.
assertions of patriotic self-assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity and intellectual inferiority. Proof that, in fact, we need a ruling elite making decisions for us. But the next conservative...
Holy shit, dude. Are you hearing this? One more time. I just want to understand what they're saying here.
assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity and intellectual inferiority. Proof that, in fact, we need a ruling elite making decisions for us.
We need a ruling elite making decisions for us, they said. Oh my God.
But the next conservative president should be proud, not ashamed of Americans' unique culture of social equality and ordered liberty. After all, the countries where Marxist elites have won political and economic power are all weaker, poorer, and less free for it. The United States remains the most innovative and upwardly mobile society in the world. Government should stop trying to substitute its own preferences for those of the people. And the next conservative president should champion the dynamic genius of free enterprise against the grim miseries of elite-directed socialism.
Free enterprise is bright and good and happy, I guess. And socialism is bad and evil and wrong. Do you know what socialism is, actually? I found this out recently. Socialism is simply, all right, nonprofit organizations like 501c3 nonprofits, they have a board of directors, and that board of directors is voted in, and they make decisions for the organization. Everybody along the line is voted in. Like, bosses vote for bosses who then vote for other bosses. Everybody's pay is voted upon. Like, my wife works for American Atheists now. The board has to vote on hiring her, on how much money she makes, and things like that. That's socialism. That is what socialism is. That's how it works. It's called a democratized workplace, where everybody all along the line like votes on things. That isn't like a bad thing. I don't understand why anybody would say that that's a bad thing. Like, what? Additionally, free market, whatever, is objectively worse than that, in my opinion. But okay, whatever. Also, one more thing. Socialism had a different meaning in Germany, like the National Socialists, the nationalist socialists. What it meant at that time was in favor of social programs, like welfare programs, pensions, military funding, Social Security, universal health care, things like that. Anyway, that's what that was. But, these people that we're listening to are going to lie about it and twist it around and turn it into something it's not, as usual.
The promise of socialism, communism, Marxism, progressivism, fascism, whatever name it chooses, is simple. Government control of the economy.
Fascism, progressivism, wokeism, and fascism are all the same thing, you see. Okay.
Can ensure equal outcomes for all people. The problem is that it has never done so. There is no such thing as the government. There are just people who work for the government and wield its power, and who at almost every opportunity wield it to serve themselves first and everyone else a distant second. This is not a failing of one nation or socialist party, but inherent in human nature. Nighttime satellite images of the Korean peninsula famously show the free market South lit up, with homes, businesses, and cities electrify from coast to coast. By contrast, communist North Korea is almost completely dark.
Well, actually, North Korea is a democratic people's republic, to correct you on that. Now, in all seriousness, North Korea is a nightmare. It's a hellscape. It's terrible. And it does have, fewer lights. You can very clearly see, less lighting at night from space. That's true. But you know what caused that? It wasn't communism. It was authoritarianism. It was dictatorship. That's what caused it, which is literally what this document, Project 2025, is trying to produce. It's trying to create they just said it should be in the hands of a ruling elite, right? This document is trying to rework the U.S. government to be something that can be controlled completely and totally by the president, and that's it. They are complaining about something and trying to create that thing. I mean, it does not get more disturbing than that.
Except for the small dot of the capital city, Pyongyang, where a psychotic dictator and his cronies live. The same phenomenon is on display in the infuriating fact that 4 of the 6 richest counties in the United States are suburbs of Washington, D.C., a city infamous for its lack of native productive industries. We see the same corruption.
What? I don't think I know what he means.
Expressed on an individual level whenever billionaire climate activists who want to outlaw carbon-fueled transportation fell to A-list conferences on their private jets.
I mean, that's a little hypocritical. That's true. But they are advocating for policies that would completely change the whole thing. And honestly, private jets, yeah, they are a problem, absolutely. But they're not the biggest problem. I'll tell you what would be fantastic is if we could change our entire electrical grid around to be renewable resources, like fully outfit our electrical grid with solar power, nuclear power, and wind. I'd be way happier with that. And if they need to take private jets to these conferences to plan how to make that happen, I'm okay with that. That's fine with me.
Or when COVID-19 shut down politicians like former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and California Governor Gavin Newsom were caught at the hair salon or dining at fancy restaurants after moralizing about how everyone else must stay home and forgo such luxuries during the pandemic.
I mean, this is complicated, but there is no nuance in these people's minds, so I'm not going to bother.
For socialists, who are almost always well-to-do, socialism is not a means of equalizing outcomes, but a means of accumulating power.
No, it's not. It is literally not that. It is democratizing a workplace, as I just described. These people shamelessly lie. You can't convince me that the lawyers that wrote this don't actually know what socialism is. You can't convince me of that.
They never get around to helping anyone else. The Soviet Empire was a social and economic failure.
The Soviet Empire was not a socialist organization or government or whatever. It was a communist government. They're different. You can't convince me the lawyers that wrote this don't know that socialism and communism are different. Do you think that they could define them for us? Both of those things? Socialism is effectively a democratized workplace where people vote on their bosses and they vote on their bosses and their pay and everything else. And communism is state-owned, or people-owned if you want to get technical or whatever. Everything is owned by the state. And that's fantastic in theory, but in practice, corruption slips into every system, and you need to have a balance against corruption.
North Korea, despite the opulence of its tyrants, is one of the poorest nations in the world. Cuba is so corrupt that its people regularly risk their lives to escape to Florida on rafts. Venezuela was once the richest nation in South America. Today, a decade after a Marxist dictator, Sanders' home state of Vermont was forced to repeal the state's single-payer healthcare system just 3 years after creating it.
Okay, a lot of these cases had nothing to do with socialism or communism. And in fact, some of those aren't even socialist or communist. It was authoritarianism and corruption that eroded the system, which is exactly what this Project 2025 is trying to create. I can't believe they just like sit here and say all of this shit with absolutely no shame. This just blows me away.
In every case, socialist elites promised that if only they could direct the economy, everything would be better. Very quickly, everything got worse. In socialist nation after socialist nation, the only way the government could keep its disgruntled people in line was to surveil and terrorize them. By contrast, in countries with a high degree of economic freedom, elites are not in charge because everyone is in charge. People work, build, invest, save, and create according to their own interests and in service to the common good of their fellow citizens. There's a reason why the private economy hews to the maxim.
They literally just described communism. They said, wait, let me step back one more time. I'm sorry.
Build, invest, save.
Wait.
Line was to surveil and terrorize them. By contrast, in countries with a high degree of economic freedom, elites are not in charge because everyone is in charge. People work, build, invest, save, and create according to their own interests and in service to the common good of their fellow citizens.
That is how communists define communism. It all has nuance, of course. Communism and capitalism aren't the same thing, and they don't operate that way. But wow, that is really funny that they described it that way. So stupid.
There's a reason why the private economy hews to the maxim, the customer is always right, while government bureaucracies are notoriously user-unfriendly.
They cut the last part of that. The customer is always right in taste is the rest of that term, I think. Meaning the customer dictates what kind of product the customer wants. You can't force a product on people. They're going to choose it.
Just as there's a reason why private charities are cheerful and government welfare systems are not. It's not because grocery store clerks and PTA moms are good and federal bureaucrats are bad. It's because private enterprises, for profit or non-profit, must cooperate to give to succeed. So as the American people take back their sovereignty, constitutional authority, respect for their families and communities, they should also take back their right to pursue the good life.
Yeah, but that's literally the exact opposite of what this document has been describing. This whole time, they said, we want to put power in the hands of an elite. That's what they said earlier. Am I wrong? Did I misunderstand? I heard them say that. They want to put it in the hands of an elite. That is the exact opposite of what they're advocating for now, suddenly. They're pretending that they don't want that or whatever. What is going on here?
The next president should promote pro-growth economic policies that spur new jobs and investment, higher wages, and productivity. Yes, that agenda should include overdue tax and regulatory reform, but it should go further and include antitrust enforcement against corporate monopolies. It should promote educational opportunities outside the woke-dominated system of public schools and universities, including trade schools, apprenticeship programs, and student loan alternatives that fund students' dreams instead of Marxist academics.
Yeah, that's one of the goals of Project 2025 is to reduce the number of people that go to college. And this exact thing happened in Germany also. The reason I bring up Germany is because I think that the people that wrote this read through some history books for tips, really. Like, authoritarian governments work similarly all over the world. It's not like they don't necessarily need to read like old history books on World War II to whatever, but in this case, I believe that they are reading through for tips. It's too similar. It's too, let me say this. It's too similar for coincidence, in my opinion. It's like when Donald Trump quotes Hitler word for word, like saying that people are cockroaches or that like immigrants are poisoning the blood of the country. This is literally word for word what Hitler said. They believed Jews to be immigrants, even though they weren't. Word for word. I have trouble believing that it was just pure coincidence.
Just as important as expanding opportunities for workers and small businesses, the next president should crack down on the crony capitalist corruption that enables America's largest corporations to profit through political influence rather than competitive enterprise and customer satisfaction. Analogous pro-growth reforms for America's voluntary...
So what they just said, is they're talking about crony capitalism, which pretty much everybody can agree is bad, right? Like people using their position to like benefit their own companies and things like that. That's bad. Except they're not trying to fix that. These people who wrote this are actively trying to make that worse. They're trying to take advantage of crony capitalism while pretending that they are not. It's shameless.
Civil society are also in order. America is not an economy, it is a country. Economic freedom is not the only important freedom. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and the freedom to assemble also represent key components of the American promise. Today, in addition to the problem of big tech censorship, we see speakers at universities shouted down, parents investigated and arrested for attempting to speak at school board meetings, and donors to conservative causes harassed and intimidated.
I'm sorry, I cannot let that stand. No. People are not arrested for speaking at school board meetings. There was one woman that was arrested after going to a school board meeting who basically said she was going to come back with a gun next time. If they don't change this policy, she's going to come back with a gun. See, they'll change it then. That's terrorism. That is illegal. She deserved to be arrested for that one. Also, in addition to that, there was an organized group. There's an organized group of people that were moving through the country from school board meeting to school board meeting. They didn't even have kids in that district. They didn't even live in that district or even that state. And they were going from place to place, speaking at these school boards, trying to force them to do things and threatening them, following the school board members home at night and, stalking them effectively, scaring the shit out of them, until the Department of Justice wrote a memo on basically how they were going to arrest terrorists if they're terrorizing people to get them to change their political position based on that terror, which is exactly what terrorism is. If they were doing that, then they were going to be arrested. That's what was happening. That was the letter to the from the DOJ. And that's what Project 2025 is talking about. They're trying to make it out as though the Department of Justice was just threatening to arrest random people who just cared about their children. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense. All the way down. I don't want them to get away with any of this BS.
The next conservative president must defend our First Amendment rights. Ultimately, the left does not believe that all men are created equal.
I certainly believe that. I don't know what you're talking about.
They think they are special. They certainly don't think all people have an unalienable right to pursue the good life.
Yes, I do.
They think only they themselves have such a right, along with a moral responsibility to make decisions for everyone else.
It's not a moral responsibility, but in some cases, we have an obligation to protect society from idiots, for the good of everybody in society. For example, if somebody has polio, all right, let me frame it up in a way that a conservative mind might be able to understand. If somebody has HIV because they've been sleeping around out of wedlock or whatever, I have a moral responsibility, I guess one could say, suppose, to protect society by making sure that they don't go around sleeping with other people without warning them. That's called, I think that's some form of murder, right? I'm not sure. If somebody has polio and they're going around spreading it to others, I have a moral obligation to protect society from those people spreading it to others intentionally or otherwise, even unintentionally. If I can stop 50,000 people from dying by getting them vaccinated, I have a moral obligation to make sure that as many people are vaccinated as possible. Now, I don't want to force vaccines on anybody. If you don't want to get vaccinated, you don't have to, but you can't participate in society in a normal way if you don't. Your kid cannot go to school with people that are vaccinated or some who couldn't be for one reason or another. You're going to have to homeschool them or send them to a private school in that case, for example. I need to protect society from some idiots. And in that way, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few in some cases. Guns, set the Constitution aside because the Constitution does not protect everybody's right to own a gun completely unregulated. Just ignore it for a moment. Guns being behind every blade of grass increases the likelihood that mass shooters are going to be able to get their hands on those guns and perpetrate it. However, if you regulate it well by having a licensure program, gun insurance, making sure everybody has a gun safe as a mandatory part of owning one or whatever, well regulated, I think the U.S. could decrease the number of deaths yearly by an insane amount. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few in that case. You want a gun? You can have one, but you have to prove you know how to use it and keep it safe. You don't want a vaccine? You don't have to have a vaccine, but you can't transmit your illness to the rest of society or put the rest of society at risk. The Project 2025 people wanted to twist it around to be a situation in which they're being persecuted. They want the right to infect other people. They want the right to put school children in danger by passing out guns on the street practically. And you are violating their rights. Your rights end where my rights begin. I have a right to life. You don't have a right to put my life in danger by passing out guns on the street. Anyway, there's a balance there, and it's pretty clearly defined in the Constitution, the balance is. But conservative nutcases like Trumpists and Kevin Roberts, the writer of Project 2025, and others, have flipped that balance around to be something completely different.
I don't think any citizen, state, business, church, or charity should be allowed any freedom until they first bend the knee. This book,
No, I don't want anybody to bend any knee to anybody else. I just don't want you to be able to violate other people's rights in the process of exercising your own. That is exactly what, the government is there to do, is to protect me from that.
agenda, the entire Project 2025, is a plan to unite the conservative movement and the American people against elite rule and woke culture warriors.
Please.
Our movement has not been united in recent years, and our country has paid the price. In the past decade, though, the breakdown of the family, the rise of China, the Great Awakening, big tech's abuses.
The Great Awakening. God, that kills me. Seriously. What a stupid name.
And the erosion of constitutional accountability in Washington have rendered these divisions not just inconvenient, but politically suicidal. Every hour the left directs federal policy and elite institutions, our sovereignty, our constitution, our families, and our freedom are a step closer to disappearing. Conservatives have just 2 years and one shot to get this right. With enemies at home and abroad, there is no margin for error. Time is running short. If we fail, the fight for the very idea of America may be lost. But we should take this small window of opportunity we have left to act with courage and confidence, not despair. The last time our nation and movement were so near defeat, we rallied together behind a great leader and great ideas, transcended our difference, rescued our nation, and changed the world.
Unfortunately, Trump didn't win because these ideas of Project 2025 were popular. He won because Kamala Harris was very, very unpopular, or people just otherwise weren't motivated to vote Democrat. They weren't motivated to get out there and do it. Trump, honestly, isn't much more popular than he was last time around, which is to say he's not popular, like, at all. I don't think that the country is ready for a female president, unfortunately. I just think that's what it is.
It's time to do it again. Now as then, we know who we are fighting and what we are fighting for our republic, our freedom, and for each other. The next conservative president will enter office on January 20th, 2025, with a simple choice: greatness or failure. It will be a daunting test, but no more so than every generation of Americans has faced and passed. The conservative promise represents the best effort of the conservative movement in 2023, and the next conservative president's last opportunity to save our republic. Section 1. Taking the reins of government. Next presidency, America is now divided between two opposing forces: woke revolutionaries and those who believe in the ideals of the American Revolution. The former believe that America is, and always has been, systemically racist, and that it is not worth celebrating and must be fundamentally transformed, largely through a centralized administrative state.
I'm sorry, what? What is all that? Said that the left believes all that? No, the left does not believe any of that. They said, hey, let me just, one more time, just listen again.
Revolutionaries and those who believe in the ideals of the American Revolution. The former believe that America is, and always has been, systemically racist, and that it is not worth celebrating and must be fundamentally transformed, largely through a centralized administrative state.
No, that is the exact opposite. The left believes, of course, that America is built on, like, systemically racist qualities. That's just true. That's factual. That is the case. But I don't believe that it shouldn't be celebrated. Like, I'm patriotic. I love the country. Yeah, absolutely. And I also don't, my patriotism motivates me to fight against anybody that wants to centralize the government power in the hands of a few. That is what this document is. Describes how to centralize power in the hands of, like, the Republicans, of Donald Trump specifically. That is what this document is about. I have no idea, like, what they're even talking about. It's like they're demonizing something and then going on to describe how they intend to do that thing.
The latter believe in America's history and heroes, its principles and promise, and in everyday Americans and the American way of life.
Okay, that's what Republicans believe in? All right, go on.
They believe in the Constitution and Republican government. Conservatives, the Americanists in this battle, must fight for the soul of America, which is very much at stake.
The Americanists, i.e., I mean, should I take that to mean that, like, Republicans don't view the left as American? Am I reading this correctly?
Just 2 years after the death of the last surviving Constitutional Convention delegate, James Madison, Abraham Lincoln warned that the greatest threat to America would come not from without, but from within. This is evident today. Whether it be mask and vaccine mandates, school and business closures, effort to keep Americans from driving gas cars or using gas stoves, or effort to defund the police, indoctrinate school children, alter beloved books, abridge free speech, undermine the colorblind ideal, or deny the biological reality that there are only two sexes, the left's steady stream of insanity appears to be never-ending.
Like, this whole thing is delusion. None of this is true. The left is not trying to do any of this shit. It is pure, unadulterated delusion. One more time.
Or deny the biological reality that there are only two sexes. The left's steady stream of insanity appears to be never-ending.
Yeah, this is all just false.
The next administration must stand up for American ideals, American families, and American culture, all things in which, thankfully, most Americans still believe. Highlighting this need, former director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russ Vought, writes in Chapter 2, the modern conservative president's task is to limit, control, and direct the executive branch on behalf of the American people.
Right. The Office of Management and Budget, OMB, I believe. They're going to talk about that a lot in a little while. But I believe that it is basically like, I think it's like the HR department of the staffing at the White House or in political appointments, to my knowledge. So they're basically going to try to fire anybody. They're going to try to fire people for political beliefs. If you don't support Donald Trump specifically, if you didn't vote for Trump specifically, you might be facing a firing, basically.
At the core of this goal is the work of the White House and the central personnel agencies. Article 2 of the Constitution vests all federal executive power in a president, made accountable to the citizenry through regular elections. Our founders wrote, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. Accordingly, Vought writes, it is the president's agenda that should matter to the departments and agencies, not their own. Yet the federal bureaucracy has a mind of its own. Federal employees are often ideologically aligned, not with the majority of the American people, but with one another, posing a profound problem for Republican government, a government of, by, and for the people. As Donald Devine, Dennis Kirk, and Paul Dans write in Chapter 3, an autonomous bureaucracy has neither independent constitutional status nor separate moral legitimacy. Byzantine personnel rules provide the bureaucrats with their chief means of self-protection. What's more, knowledge of such rules is used to thwart the president's appointees and agenda. As Devine, Kirk, and Dans write, managing the immense bureaucracy of the federal government is impossible without an understanding of the key central personnel agencies and their governing laws and regulations. Many of these laws and regulations governing a largely underworked, overcompensated, and unaccountable federal civilian workforce.
Underworked and overcompensated workforce? Is that what they just said?
Many of these laws and regulations governing a largely underworked, overcompensated, and unaccountable federal civilian workforce are...
Yeah, that's what they said. Underworked and overcompensated workforce. So they're saying we want to pay people less and work them harder. I mean, they're working 40 hours a week. What do you mean underworked? You saying you want to increase the work week from like 5 days a week to 6? And federal employees are overpaid? I mean, that's one opinion. I think the rest of society is underpaid, but okay.
So irrational that they would be comical in a less important context. This is true whether it comes to evaluating employees' performance or hiring new employees. Only in the federal government could an applicant in the hiring process be sent to the front of the line because of a history of drug addiction or alcoholism or due to morbid obesity.
That doesn't happen. Applicants have never been sent to the front of the line because they're drug addicts. That has literally, to my knowledge, never happened in the history of ever. Drug addiction works against you when you're an applicant to anything at all. Trust me. Or obesity or whatever. These things work against you. They're like, how can they even say this? It just blows me away that they say this like without a hint of irony. Like even under affirmative action, which is now undone, like it doesn't exist anymore. Affirmative action doesn't, to my knowledge. Even under affirmative action, that's not how anything worked. People would be, companies would favor equalizing demographics. All other things being equal, they would try to make things fair. So if there are like, 30% black people in this town and you only hire 3% black people, they would try to even that out by, all things being equal, hiring a black candidate until it's equalized again. If you have 35% black candidates and it's only 30% black, your town is, then they'll try to hire an additional white force or an additional Asian force or whatever. Like, it's trying to even out. I guess you couldn't have an explicit racial quota before affirmative action, but it doesn't matter because affirmative action is undone anyway. So what was, yeah, you couldn't have a racial quota, but what was affirmative action then, if not trying to even things out more? Oh, okay. No, it's fine. No, that works. Yeah, so no racial quotas, but people pick the black applicants in the spirit of trying to make things more fair, basically. That's what it was. Like, it doesn't matter because it's been undone. It's no longer good law, to my understanding. So it's irrelevant now. But that's what these people are talking about. They're complaining about things being more fair. Seriously. They didn't want things to be more fair. What purpose could they possibly have? Like, what goal exists here? Why would anybody try to make things less fair like this? I can only think of one reason: to make it so that, like, black applicants have a harder time obtaining work in any industry. I can only think of one reason why anybody would try to do that. I mean, if you got another, tell me in the comments.
Irritable bowel syndrome, or a psychiatric disorder. The next administration should insist that the federal government's hiring, evaluation, retention, and compensation practices benefit taxpayers rather than benefiting the lowest rung of the federal workforce. In order to carry out...
Okay, I don't know what that means, but no, people should be paid a fair wage for the work that they put in. I don't care about any of that.
The president's desires, political appointees must be given the tools, knowledge, and support to overcome the federal government's obstructionist human resources departments. More fundamentally, the new administration must fill its ranks with political appointees. Devine, Kirk, and Dans observed that the Trump administration appointed fewer political appointees in its first few months in office than any other recent presidency.
Okay, this is what I'm talking about. When they were saying previously that North Korea is like a train wreck, it's really bad, and that, you know, the free market is what caused South Korea to be good and all of that stuff. North Korea isn't bad because it's communist, quote unquote. It's bad because it's authoritarian, because it's centralized, condensed power. And that is what this document is trying to produce: condensed power. They are about to detail, they just described exactly what makes North Korea bad and said that they want that to exist in the United States. They're trying to make that happen in the US. Like, can it be any more on the nose than this? It's wild to me that these people so brazenly just come out and say this shit.
This left career employees in charge in many places. This can occur even after departments have been fully staffed with political appointees. Vaught writes that the White House Office of Management and Budget, OMB, should establish a reputation as the keeper of commander's intent.
Again, I believe that OMB is the HR department for political appointees, I think.
Yet OMB is dominated by career employees who often try to overrule political appointees serving in the various executive departments.
Yeah, they shouldn't be political appointees. They should be people that come in, do their job every day, and go home at the end of the day or whatever. Like, certain decisions should not be political or in the hands of political people. Like, the guy that counts the votes shouldn't be a political appointee. He should just be a guy that's there to do his job and go home at the end of the day. The guy at the DMV who decides who is allowed to register to vote and who isn't shouldn't be a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter. He should just be a guy that goes to work every day, does his job, goes home. This document is trying to make everybody up the chain, including the guy at the DMV that decides if somebody gets registered to vote when they apply for an ID. Even that guy is going to be a Trump supporter. That's what this document is trying to do, and likely going to succeed in doing, which means we have to work even harder than we have to try to fight this. We have to fight it. And I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. There will always be something that we can do to fight. We will always be able to do something. In North Korea, they are sending balloons with USB drives over the border with, like, South Korean TV shows. That's their way of fighting. Or with, like, messages to the outside world. In Germany, they would put, like, they'd give random Jews their ration cards, extra ration cards. There'll always be some way to fight. Always. No matter how bad it gets. And I don't believe it's going to get that bad. So no matter how bad it gets, we need to keep fighting. Find a way to help. Should I go further with this? Yeah, let me take it just one step further. Hitler could size up armies and determine, like, if he could take them, right? Like, he could I mean, he wasn't always accurate, but like with Operation Barbarossa, fighting the Soviet Union, he could size them up and he could talk to his generals and determine if it was possible to beat them or whatever. He couldn't do that with internal resistance. And he knew that the Catholic Church was big enough within Germany that they could cause an untold amount of damage if they chose to Hitler's regime. They could tell all of their, all of their people, the Catholics could, to oppose Nazis at every turn, and suddenly people in the German military would start putting their guns down and walk away. The last thing that any country wants ever is internal dissent, is fighting from inside. The only thing that can destroy the United States is a war from within. I don't remember who said that. Lincoln, maybe, or something. I think they mentioned it earlier in this book. But anyway, if the United States took control of, of Canada, just say worst case scenario, they took Greenland, they took Canada, Panama, the only people that could stop them would not be Iran, would not be Russia, would not be China, wouldn't be England, wouldn't be any of those people. It would be us. Somebody threatens Russia's borders, they've said that they're going to launch nukes at them. Like if America invaded Russia, Russia would launch nukes at America. Who is Russia going to launch nukes at if their own people dissent? That's the only way that Russia will be taken down. It's the only way America could be taken down. Anybody could be taken down. So your dissent is more important than anything else, than anybody else's dissent. Your fight, your struggle against what's happening is more important than anybody's. And when you give up, the war is truly lost.
Empowering political appointees across the administration is crucial to a president's success. Above all, the president and those who serve under him or her must be committed to the Constitution and the rule of law. This is particularly true of a conservative administration, which knows that the president is there to uphold the Constitution, not the other way around. If a conservative administration does not respect the Constitution, no administration will. In Chapter 1, former Deputy Chief of Staff to the President Rick Dearborn writes that the White House Counsel must take seriously the duty to protect the powers and privileges of the president from encroachments by Congress, the judiciary, and the administrative components of departments and agencies. Equally important, the president must enforce the Constitution and laws as written, rather than proclaiming new law unilaterally. Presidents should not issue mask or vaccine mandates, arbitrarily transfer student loan debt, or issue monarchical mandates of any sort.
Interesting. So they're saying that they're opposed to executive orders, huh? I happen to know for a fact that that is untrue, but okay. Like, I'm not opposed to executive orders. Those are like one of the levers of government that exist for a reason. Everything that exists in government pretty much is there as a check on power, even jury nullification. It's all there to be a check in case one piece of government does something it's not supposed to do, basically. And again, I'm fine with executive orders as long as they're being used appropriately. And you know what? These people are actually fine with them too. In fact, they like executive orders very much. Half the shit in Project 2025 is which executive orders they want to push through and in what order. So this whole bit about, we aren't in favor of executive orders, that's just fictitious. That's not true. They absolutely are in favor of executive orders.
Legislatures make the laws in a republic, not executives. It is crucial that all three branches of the federal government respect what Madison called the double security to our liberties, the separation of powers among the three branches, and the separation of powers between the federal government and the states. This double security has been greatly compromised over the years. Vaught writes that the modern executive branch writes federal policy, enforces that policy, and often adjudicates whether that policy was properly drafted and enforced. He describes this as constitutionally dire and in urgent need of repair, adding, nothing less than the survival of self-governance in America is at stake. When it comes to ensuring that freedom can flourish, nothing is more important than deconstructing the centralized administrative state. Political appointees who are answerable to the president and have decision-making authority in the executive branch are key to this essential task. The next administration must not cede such authority to nonpartisan experts who pursue their own ends while engaging in groupthink, insulated from American voters. The following chapters detail how the next administration can be responsive to the American people, not to entrenched elites, how it can take care that all the laws are faithfully executed, not merely those that the president desires to see executed, and how it can achieve results and not be stymied by an unelected bureaucracy.
All of the things that they're saying in here are fantastic. I love that. And then they go on to detail how they're going to do the exact opposite. Like, they couldn't have made it more obvious that they're lying if they tried. they're not even, it's like they're not even trying to hide the fact that they're lying, that they're pretending to want this or that, or try to get rid of this or that or whatever. It's wild. Like, usually these documents are more veiled in the things that they say.
White House office. Rick Dearborn, a feature role in innumerable movies and television shows, and has been prodded, analyzed, and critiqued by countless books, essays, and studies. But like nearly everything else in life, there is no substitute for first-hand experience, which this manual has compiled from the experience of presidential appointees and provides an accessible form for future use. With respect to the presidency, it is best to begin with our republic's foundational document. The Constitution gives the executive power to the president. 1. President might seek the assistance of the principal office in each of the execu, supported by some form of White House office consisting of direct staff office as well as a cabinet comprised of department and agency heads.
Sorry, the document is not perfect, like the audiobook, whatever. It's not perfect. It gets some things wrong sometimes, but I think you can kind of pick up what the point is and what it's getting at least. Oh, yeah, and also some of this book is a little bit dry. It's kind of laying out like what the plans are generally, and they're not really like, they're not sinister or psychotic. They're just normal policy choices. But I still want to listen to those parts because I want to get through the whole thing. So if anybody wants to listen to the whole thing, they have that choice.
The inaugural administration of the late 18th century, citizens have chosen to devote both their time and their talent to defending and strengthening our nation by serving at the pleasure of the president. Their shared patriotic endeavor has proven to be a noble one, not least because the jobs in what is now known as the White House office, WHO, are among the most demanding in all of government. The president must rely on the men and women appointed to the WHO. There simply are not enough hours in the day to manage the affair of state single-handedly, so delegation is not just advisable, it is essential. The decisions that assistants and senior advisors make will directly impact the administration.
So what they're saying now is that we have to delegate things. Like, there's too much stuff to do to not delegate. Like, God, I slipped on a banana peel. Like, it's important. Oh my God, I'm dying. I'm retrying this. Like, it's important that we delegate environmental protection decisions to the EPA because the president isn't, an environmental lawyer or like a scientist. It's important to delegate those things to people that know what they're doing and what they're talking about. That's what they're saying here.
Its legacy, and most important, the fate of the country. Their agenda must therefore be the president's agenda. Choosing who will carry out that agenda on a daily basis is not only one of the first decisions a president makes in office, but also one of the most critical.
So they're saying we want everybody in the EPA, all the way up the chain, even the scientists, we want them to be Trump supporters. It's critical that they are all Trump supporters and do whatever Trump wants them to do. No, I think it's critical that they're scientists that know what they're talking about over anything else. Like, and it's disturbing to me that they want to replace them with like political appointees like this. The president doesn't know what he's talking about or what he's doing. No president does. They don't know everything about all of this stuff. Like, not just the EPA, but we're talking about like everything, like every agency, the FBI, even all of this stuff. The president doesn't know about all of this. It needs to be delegated, and people that are experts in the field need to be able to like inform the president of what they think the best decisions are and the risks and everything else. They don't need to be political appointees. They shouldn't be. They should just give the president information, the best information that they can at any moment. It should not be a political appointment. Just insane.
The tone and tempo of an administration are often determined on January 20th. Chief of Staff. As with most of the positions that will be covered in this first chapter, the Chief of Staff is also an assistant to the President. However, the Chief is truly first among equals. Of all presidential staff members, the Chief is the most critical to implementation of the President's vision for the country. The Chief also has a dual role as manager of the staff of both the WHO and the Executive Office of the President, EOP. 5. The Chief of Staff's first managerial task is to establish an organizational chart for the WHO. It should be simple and contain clear lines of authority and responsibility to avoid conflict. It should also identify specified points of contact for each element of the government outside of the White House. These contacts should include the White House liaisons, who are selected by the Office of Presidential Personnel, PPO. Receiving guidance from the President, the Chief endeavors to implement the President's agenda by setting priorities for the WHO. This process begins by taking stock of the President's campaign promises.
By the way, Vic3589, thank you so much for the sticker. I really appreciate that. Meant to mention that earlier.
Identifying current and prospective opportunities, and then delegating policy priorities among the departments and agencies of the Cabinet and throughout the 3 White House policy councils. L, the National Economic Council, L, the Domestic Policy Council, DPC, and L, the National Security Council. The President is
I think it was listing things. L was just like one probably, or a dash or something. I don't know.
Briefed on all of his policy priorities by his cabinet and senior staff as directed by the chief. Chief, along with senior WHO staff, maps out the issues and themes that will be covered daily and weekly. The chief then works with the policy councils, the cabinet, and the Office of Communications and Office of Legislative Affairs, OLA, to sequence and execute the rollout of policies and announcements. White House counsel and senior advisors and senior counselors are also intimately involved. All senior staff report to the chief of staff, either directly or through his 2 or 3 deputies.
They're just describing the structure here generally, which is useful information, but it can be dry for some people. I think it's important to be aware of like how it operates and what these people intend to do when they get there. So,
unless the president determines that a particular assistant to the president reports directly to him. Most chiefs have interacted directly with Cabinet Office and a select number of direct reports. In most cases, the direct reports to the chief are his 2 or 3 deputies, the communications director, PPO director, White House counsel, and senior advisors. Occasionally, the Office of Public Liaison, OPL, the Cabinet Secretary, and Intergovernmental Affairs, IGA, also report directly to the chief. Usually, however, they report instead to a deputy chief of staff. The chief of staff's main challenge is time management. His use of his deputies, meetings with senior staff, and direction provided to the WHO must all balance with the daily needs of the president. A successful chief steers the West Wing using his management of and influence with the various individuals and entities around him. It goes without saying that selecting the right person to be chief is vital. Deputy chiefs of staff. In recent years, presidents typically have appointed 2 deputy chiefs of staff, a deputy chief of staff for management and operations, and a deputy chief of staff for policy. There also have been other types of deputy chiefs whose roles have included, for example, overseeing strategy, planning, and implementation. Chiefs of staff have then occasionally appointed a principal deputy chief to be in charge of guiding decision-making, organizational structure, and information flow. Principal deputy chiefs of staff. Not all chiefs of staff have tapped a principal deputy. A major reason is that doing so adds another layer of command complexity. When principal deputies have been installed, their roles have varied based on the needs of particular chiefs. Most principal deputies have functioned as doorkeepers, sorting through action items, taking on those that can be handled at their own level, and passing up others that truly require the attention of the chief of staff or the president. Principal deputies also have assumed control of the scheduling functions, normally under the operations deputy, and have worked directly with the policy councils at the direction of the chief of staff. The OPL and Office of Political Affairs, OPA, also have reported to a principal deputy. Deputy Chief of Staff for Management and Operations. The Deputy Chief of Staff for Management and Operations oversees the president's schedule and all logistical aspects of his movement within and outside of the White House. For example, both air travel on Air Force One and Marine One, and ground transportation. This deputy also interfaces directly with the Secret Service as well as the military office tasked with keeping the president and his family safe. In the past, this deputy has also worked with the NSC, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and the intelligence community, and on advancing all foreign trips. If their roles are separated from that of the policy deputy, this deputy should have a strong grasp of international affairs and robust foreign policy credentials.
Again, this is just regular, this is how it works type of thing, and it's not really super important for us to understand, but I want to make it through anyway.
This deputy further manages all facets of the working White House: technology, grounds management, support staff, personnel administration, and communications. This individual therefore needs to be meticulous and ideally should possess a great deal of command and control experience. Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. In some administrations, the functions of the IGA, OPA, and OPL and other advisors within the WHO have fallen under the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. For conservatives, this arrangement could help to connect the WHO's outreach to political and external groups and be a strong conduit for state and local elected officia, state party organizations, and both grasstop and grassroots groups. This deputy chief works directly with the Chief of Staff, Cabinet Office, and all 3 policy councils to support the development and implementation of the president's agenda. This deputy chief should therefore have impressive policy credentials in the realms of economic, domestic, and social affairs.
Fascinating. Well, anyway, let me know what you think about this in the comments. I intend to go through the whole thing.